History moves in flashes of brilliance that go dark. This is about 15 ancient inventions lost for thousands of years. Self-healing concrete, a 2,000-year-old computer. Entire technologies can vanish. The past isn't primitive. It's a cycle of genius and forgetting that challenges what we assume about progress. A Roman cup used nanotechnology. An emperor allegedly destroyed the formula for flexible glass. The chain of human knowledge has fragile links. You see that by the end, a brilliant idea reaches the future on a fragile thread. It's about how knowledge travels or how it fails to. In the ancient world, a breakthrough wasn't a public blueprint. It was a secret held by a master artisan, passed to one apprentice. It was a single scroll copied by hand in a solitary library, a recipe known only to a specific guild in one city. That system worked until it didn't. The chain of transmission was so delicate, a single break could silence a technology for 1,000 years. A library burns, a master dies without an heir. A trade route collapses, isolating the community that held the secret. A society shifts its values, and the old ways aren't taught anymore. The Library of Alexandria is the symbol of that vulnerability. Historians debate the exact scale of the loss, but the idea is haunting. One repository holding the collected wisdom of the Mediterranean world, geometry, engineering. Its gradual decline and final destruction represent a catastrophic knowledge sink. It could erase not just books, but entire disciplines. But it wasn't always a single, dramatic fire. Often the loss was quieter, more insidious. An empire falls, and its administrative networks dissolve. The specialized material for a device is no longer available. The language used to describe a process becomes obsolete, untranslatable. Looking back, we see the gaps. A technology appears in the archaeological record. It shines for a generation or two, then vanishes as if it never was. It reminds us that human progress isn't a steady, inevitable climb. It's more like a relay race run in the dark. The torch is sometimes dropped. Runners later stumble upon it again, wondering at its heat. So when we speak of a 2,000-year-old computer or self-healing concrete, we're not just marveling at ancient genius. We're witnessing the brief, bright flashes of light, the ones that manage to pierce through a long and forgetful night. Sponge divers found it off the coast of Antikythera in 1900. They were working near a Greek island and they came across a Roman shipwreck. There were statues, ceramics, and then this lump of bronze and wood about the size of a big book. It was all corroded, misshapen, almost got set aside, but later when they started cleaning it, they saw gears, dozens of bronze gears interlocking inside a wooden frame. That was the Antikythera Mechanism from the 2nd century before the Common Era. For over a century now, they've been studying it, using X-rays, 3D mapping to look inside. And it wasn't a simple calendar. It was a model of the universe. You'd turn a hand crank and dials would move on the front and back. One showed the sun's path. Another showed the moon, its phase. It predicted eclipses years ahead, not as omens, just as events. It even tracked the cycle of the Olympic Games every 4 years. Tying human time to the cosmos, the sophistication is hard to grasp. It used differential gears. We thought those were invented in the 1500s. It modeled the moon's irregular orbit with a pin and slot design, a portable planetarium, an astronomical calculator. It means a group of thinkers back then had merged mechanical engineering with mathematical astronomy. At a level we didn't think was possible. And that's the thing, this wasn't a prototype, it was refined, probably one of many. So where are the others? Why is this the only one we've found for over 1,000 years? The knowledge didn't fade, it was extinguished. the Greek city-states declined. Rome rose with different priorities. The specialized workshops, the fragile manuscripts that whole threads snapped. The mechanism became a ghost. Its principles of geared computation didn't come back until the cathedral clocks, the 14th century. For more than a millennium, the blueprint for a mechanical universe was lost. The Antikythera Mechanism was a marvel of calculation, but the next invention was a spectacle of power. It was called Greek fire. For centuries, it was the ultimate naval weapon of the Byzantine Empire. You have a ship on the dark sea, and from an enemy vessel, a jet of liquid flame erupts. It doesn't just burn, it clings, it flows across the water. You can't put it out with water. It was like fighting the sea itself when the sea was on fire. This wasn't just an advantage, it was a psychological weapon, a weapon of absolute dominance, and its secret was guarded. The formula, the specialized bronze siphons to project it, these were a state secret. Known only to a select few, probably the emperor and one family of chemists. The penalty for revealing it was death. That secrecy worked for hundreds of years. It saved Constantinople from sieges time and again, but it created the perfect conditions for total loss. The knowledge wasn't shared, it was hoarded. And when the empire entered its long decline, when those last few guardians were gone, the flame went out forever. Now, modern historians and chemists have fragments. Ancient texts describe its behavior, that it roared and hissed, that you could only put it out with sand or vinegar or urine. They think it was a crude napalm. A mix of petroleum, pine resin, maybe quicklime. Quicklime reacts with water, generates intense heat, but every attempt to recreate it falls short. The true recipe is gone. More importantly, the precise delivery system, the pressurized system that made it a projectile, not just a burning pool, that's gone. Greek fire is a different kind of loss than the Antikythera Mechanism. One was a tool of understanding, the other was a tool of survival. Its disappearance shows something. A technology, when it's bound to a single power, shrouded in absolute secrecy, becomes a hostage. It doesn't fade, it vanishes in a single, final silence when that power falls. Greek fire was a defensive weapon, a state secret, but then there was Roman concrete. That was the empire's actual fabric, and losing it meant a slow erosion of common knowledge. You see the structures they left, the Pantheon, that huge dome with no support, still there after 2,000 years. The aqueducts crossing the land, many of them still sound. They built harbors that stood against the sea. Our modern concrete, Portland cement, it can crumble in decades from salt water. So what did the Romans know that we didn't? For a long time, the recipe was lost. We had the basics from old texts, Vitruvius. They used lime, volcanic ash, aggregate, stones, and rubble. But the magic was in the specifics. Modern research with advanced microscopes has figured some of it out. The key was the chemical reaction, not just the ingredients. They mixed lime and a specific volcanic ash, often from Pozzuoli, and they used seawater to mix it. That combination started a long, slow chemical chain. Over centuries, as tiny cracks formed, the seawater reacting with the volcanic material would create a rare mineral, aluminum tobamorite. This crystal patches the cracks. The concrete doesn't just resist damage, it heals itself. It gets stronger with time, with exposure to the very elements it was built for. It's a material that learns from stress. So why did this knowledge fade? It wasn't lost in a single event. It was lost in the fragmentation of a system. The Roman Empire was this vast, interconnected machine. It had standardized production, supply chains that brought specific ash from Pozzuoli to sites all around the Mediterranean. When the empire's political and economic networks began to unravel in the 4th and 5th centuries, those chains broke. The specialized knowledge of the master builders, the architecti, became scattered. Construction became local, improvised. The precise mixture, the understanding of the chemical process, it wasn't written down as a complete formula. It was a craft passed down through practice, and that practice changed. The concrete used later was a poor imitation. The structures didn't last. The self-healing secret was just sleeping in the ruins, waiting for modern tools to find it. It's a profound thing. The most practical, world-shaping technology isn't safe from oblivion. It can vanish because the society that nurtured it, that understood its nuances, stops functioning as a whole. The recipe for durability wasn't durable enough to survive the collapse of the civilization that made it. The pantheon is still standing because of its concrete. That concrete learned from the sea, but there was another ancient material. It wasn't made for endurance, it was made for an edge, a perfect, lethal edge. Damascus steel. For over 1,000 years, from the 3rd century to the 17th, bladesmiths in the Middle East made these legendary swords. They were said to be so sharp they could cut a silk scarf as it fell through the air. So strong they could split another blade in two without chipping, and they were beautiful. Each one had this watery pattern on the surface, like wood grain. Or rippling silk. That pattern wasn't just decoration, it was a fingerprint, the fingerprint of the steel's internal structure. That structure was the source of its power. The secret wasn't just the smith's skill, though that was deep. It was a perfect storm: geography, trade, and craft. It started with a specific raw material. A high-purity iron ore. They called it Wootz steel. It came only from mines in India. This ore was smelted into ingots. Those ingots were traded along ancient routes to cities like Damascus. There, master smiths would take them. They began a meticulous forging process, almost ritualistic. They would heat the steel, fold it, hammer it, cool it. In precise cycles, this folding wasn't random. It was controlled manipulation. It created microscopic structures inside the metal, layers of hard and soft steel. And most importantly, carbon nanotubes, nanotechnology in a medieval sword. These tiny structures, only seen with modern microscopes, gave the blade its legendary feel. Flexibility and a razor-sharp, durable edge. The wavy pattern on the surface was a map of this internal architecture. So what happened? How does a technology that perfect vanish? The loss was slow. It was the unraveling of a chain. First, the trade routes, the routes that supplied the special Indian Wootz ingots. They began to change. To break down: political shifts, new empires, different economic priorities. The raw material became scarce, then unavailable. You cannot make true Damascus steel without that specific starting ingredient. Second, the knowledge was entirely artisanal. It was held in the hands and eyes of master smiths, passed from father to son within closed guilds. There were no blueprints. No chemical formulas written down. The process was learned through a lifetime, by feeling the heat, watching the color of the metal, listening to the ring of the hammer. When the raw materials dried up, the practice died out. The last generation of masters had no ingots to work with, so the intricate dance of the forge was never passed on. The knowledge didn't just fade, it atrophied from disuse. For centuries, the secret of the watery pattern was a ghost. Modern blacksmiths could make pattern-welded steel that looked similar, but it lacked the legendary properties. It wasn't until the late 20th century, with tools like electron microscopes, researchers could look at a genuine ancient blade and see its soul. They found the carbon nanotubes. They began to understand the material science behind the myth. Today, through advanced metallurgy, we can closely approximate the properties of Damascus steel. But even now, it's a replication, a rediscovery. The original craft, born from a specific place and an unbroken line of human touch, is gone. Damascus steel teaches us that a technology isn't just a process. It's an ecosystem. It needs the right ore from a distant mine, the open road to carry it, and the trained hands of a master who speaks the silent language of fire and iron. Break any one link in that chain, and the entire creation slips back into the realm of story. The Lycurgus Cup. It's a Roman drinking glass from the 4th century. At first glance, it's this deep green, but then you hold it to the light and it changes. It glows this brilliant, translucent red. That's dichroism. The color shifts with the light. The cup itself is a cage cup. The outer glass is carved away, leaving this sculpted scene. King Lycurgus trapped in vines. But the real secret is in the glass. For 1500 years, no one knew how it worked. It seemed like alchemy. Then, in the 90s, researchers looked at fragments under an electron microscope. They found the answer. The glass was filled with millions of tiny particles, gold and silver particles, each one smaller than a grain of sand, much smaller. They were nanoparticles about 50 nanometers across. A human hair is 80,000 nanometers thick. Somehow, the Roman artisans had ground the metals so fine they created a suspension in the molten glass. When light hits the front, these particles reflect green light. When light shines through from behind, they let the red light pass. It's a manipulation of light at a scale you can't see. Nanotechnology, 16 centuries before the word existed. This wasn't mass production. It was probably a one-off experiment. A master glassmaker, maybe in Alexandria, was tinkering. He might have been trying to make a royal purple by mixing gold and silver into the batch. Through trial and error, he stumbled on this effect. He created a material that played with light in a way no one would replicate for 1,000 years. And that's the thing, the knowledge was never written down. It wasn't a formula. It was a happy accident in one workshop. When the Roman glass industry faded, when those workshops closed, the technique disappeared. The Lycurgus Cup is a solitary beacon, a message from one brilliant mind who understood his materials so intimately he could play with the nature of light. It shows that ancient innovation wasn't always some grand project. Sometimes it was the quiet, experimental genius of a single craftsperson. A flash of understanding so advanced and so fragile, it could only survive by being frozen in one beautiful object. A glass that changes color, that's one thing, but a jar that could hold a spark, that's different. In 1936, workers were digging near Baghdad. They found these strange objects. A clay jar about the size of a fist. Inside it, a copper cylinder sealed with asphalt, and inside that, an iron rod. It dated to the Parthian or Sassanid period. Somewhere between 200 BC and 200 CE. At first, it was just a storage vessel, but years later, a researcher had a thought. What if this wasn't for spices? Or scrolls, what if it was a battery, a primitive galvanic cell? The idea is compelling. If you filled the jar with an acidic liquid, vinegar or grape juice, you'd get a chemical reaction. The iron rod and the copper cylinder, separated by the electrolyte, would generate a small charge, maybe 1 volt, not enough for a light but enough for a tingle. So what would they use it for? The leading idea is electroplating, coating one metal with a thin layer of another, like putting gold on silver. You could immerse a silver object in a gold solution, attach it to the battery, and the current would draw the gold onto the surface. It's a simple application. There's also speculation about mild electrical therapy. Ancient texts describe using electric fish to numb pain. Maybe this was a controlled way to deliver that sensation. The controversy is thick. Many archaeologists are skeptical. They point out we've never found wires attached to these jars. No electroplated objects from that period that definitively required this method. They say it could have been a sacred object or just a secure container for a scroll. The debate may never be settled, but that uncertainty is the point. Because if even one of these jars was a battery, it changes the story. It means a culture over 1,000 years before Alessandro Volta's official battery in 1800 had stumbled on a practical use for electricity. They had harnessed a fundamental force for a quiet, mundane purpose, and then that knowledge vanished. Think of that timeline. a technology appears, is used in workshops or temples, and then is completely absent from the record for over 1,000 years. It didn't evolve, it didn't inspire the next thinker, it was a dead end, a single, fragile thread of understanding that just frayed and broke. The Baghdad Battery, whether it was 1 or 100, represents the most haunting kind of loss. Not the loss of a grand monument, but the loss of a basic principle, a whisper of physics that was heard, understood in a limited way, and then utterly forgotten. It makes you wonder how many other quiet whispers from the ancient world we've mistaken for silence. The Baghdad Battery is one thing, but then there's the Viking Sunstone. The Norse sagas mention it, written down later. They called it a solostine, a crystal that could locate the sun even on a completely overcast day or after sunset. It sounds like a myth, a magical stone for sailors, but in 2013 researchers found something. On a shipwreck, an English warship from the 1500s, the Alderney wreck. They found a clear, rhomboid-shaped crystal, Iceland spar, which is a form of calcite. It was lying there near navigation tools. That's not proof the Vikings used it. But it's physical evidence that sailors centuries later still carried such a crystal. So the saga stories shift. They go from fantasy to something plausible. A lost technology, the science behind it is simple. On a cloudy day, the light is scattered. It comes from everywhere. To us, it's just a uniform gray brightness. But sunlight is polarized. It vibrates in specific directions. A crystal like Iceland spar has this property by refringence. It splits light into two beams. You look through the crystal at the sky and you rotate it. The two images you see change in brightness. When the crystal aligns with the hidden sun's polarization, the two beams appear equally bright. It's a visual lock. A sailor could hold the stone up, rotate it slowly, and find that alignment. Then, by taking bearings from different parts of the sky, they could triangulate the sun's position. Even if it was completely invisible behind clouds or just below the horizon, it gave them a fixed point, a reference in a featureless seascape. Think about what that meant. The Vikings didn't have the magnetic compass. They sailed the North Atlantic, constant cloud cover, fog, the long twilight of northern summers. To reach Iceland, Greenland, Newfoundland, they needed to navigate open ocean for days. Without a visible sun or stars, the sunstone would have been their secret, a piece of the earth showing them the sky. It was a tool born from deep observation. Someone noticed the crystal's strange property and made the leap to apply it, a technology of light and perception. So why did it fade? The magnetic compass arrived in Europe around the 12th century. It was simpler. You didn't need to understand polarization. You just looked at the needle. It worked at night. It worked regardless of cloud cover, without needing a clear patch of sky. The compass was a democratizing tool. The sunstone required skill, experience, a specific high-quality crystal. The compass was a piece of iron you could mass produce. As trade routes formalized, navigation became standardized. The old artisanal method was abandoned. The knowledge didn't vanish in a catastrophe. It was simply outcompeted by a more convenient technology. The masters who knew how to read the crystal's subtle signals, they stopped teaching their apprentices. The sagas kept the name, but the practice was forgotten. It became a story until science and a shipwreck reminded us. It was once a vital, brilliant reality, a tool that let sailors see the invisible sun, and in doing that, it changed the map of the world. The Vikings navigated by reading light, but there was another culture that learned to listen to the earth. In the year 132, during China's Han Dynasty, a scholar named Zhang Heng presented something to the emperor. A large bronze vessel nearly 6 feet across. Around it, 8 dragons faced the 8 directions. Below each dragon, a bronze toad sat with its mouth open. Inside the vessel was a mystery. The court probably saw it as ceremonial, but Zhang Heng called it an earthquake detector. Its reported function was astonishing. When a tremor happened, even hundreds of miles away, one of the dragons would react. Its jaw would open. A bronze ball held inside would drop. It would fall with a loud clang right into the mouth of the toad below. The direction of the quake was announced. Court records claim it worked. Once a ball dropped from the dragon facing west, no tremor was felt in the capital. Days later, a messenger arrived from the west reporting a major earthquake. The device had detected what people could not feel. So what was inside that jar? Zhang Heng left no plans. The mechanism was lost. Modern engineers and historians have a leading theory. They think it used an inverted pendulum, a heavy mass suspended from the top, delicately balanced. When seismic waves came from a specific direction, they would jostle the vessel. The pendulum would swing. Its motion was channeled by levers. It would trigger a release for just one dragon, the one aligned with the quake's origin. It was a mechanical brain interpreting vibrations. Think about the insight that required. Zhang Heng understood that tremors travel as waves, that these waves have a direction. That a balanced system could isolate that signal from the general shaking. This wasn't magic, it was early seismology, a machine that translated invisible force into a clear message. And then it was gone. Later Chinese dynasties recorded earthquakes, but they didn't continue Zhang Heng's mechanical tradition. The detector was a singular masterpiece. Its design didn't evolve into a standard instrument. Why? The knowledge was too concentrated. It resided with one polymath and his workshop. It was a marvel for the court, not a tool disseminated to scholars. When the Han Dynasty declined, that fragile thread snapped. The physical device was probably melted down for its bronze long ago. We know of it only from texts. Today, scientists have built working replicas based on the pendulum theory. They function, but they are modern interpretations. The true elegance of Zhang Heng's original design, the precise arrangement inside, is a ghost in the record. It stands as a lesson. A concept can be centuries ahead of its time, but if it isn't woven into practice, if it isn't copied and taught to the next generation, it becomes a museum piece. A footnote, a dragon that spoke only once and then fell silent, a material that bends without breaking, that would change the world, and ancient Rome almost had it. There's a story from historians like Petronius and Pliny the Elder. During the reign of Tiberius Caesar, an artisan came to the emperor. He had a drinking bowl made of a new kind of glass. To show what it could do, he threw it on the marble floor. It didn't shatter, it just dented. Then the artisan took a small hammer and tapped the dent out. The bowl was perfect again. It was flexible glass. The emperor was interested, but then he asked a dangerous question. Does anyone else know how to make this? The artisan swore he was the only one. Tiberius ordered the man executed. His workshop was destroyed. The reason, in the story, was economic panic. The emperor feared that if glass became unbreakable and as workable as metal, it would undermine the value of gold and silver. The entire treasury of Rome could be destabilized by a single invention, so the knowledge was erased deliberately. Now, is the story literally true? Probably not in every detail. Ancient historians used anecdotes to illustrate a ruler's character. Tiberius was known for paranoia, but the persistence of the tale is what matters. It points to a theme, the deliberate suppression of technology. An invention can be too disruptive, too threatening to existing power. In this case, the threat wasn't military. It was economic. The established order of value itself was at risk. So a new material, a leap forward in utility, was deemed too dangerous to exist. It was sacrificed to protect the status quo. Could such a glass have existed? Modern material science says it's not pure fantasy. We have no evidence of flexible silicate glass from that era, but there were other paths. The Romans were master chemists with organic materials. They could have been experimenting with early transparent resins, polymers from tree sap or other natural substances. A durable, slightly malleable composite could have been described as flexible glass, or maybe it was an exceptionally tough formula of glass, something like the base material of the Lycurgus Cup. Something that resisted shattering in a way that seemed magical. The point is, the legend likely grew from a seed of real experimentation. An artisan did something remarkable with materials. And that breakthrough was met not with celebration but with elimination. This story is a different kind of loss, not a faded craft or a broken supply chain. This is knowledge murdered, lost by decree. It shows that progress isn't just vulnerable to accident or neglect. It can be seen as an enemy, a threat to be neutralized. When an invention challenges the fundamental pillars of a society, its economy, its religious doctrines, its hierarchies, the instinct can be to destroy it. Rather than adapt to it, the tale of flexible glass is a warning from the past. It asks us to consider what brilliant, unsettling ideas in our own time might be silenced, because they are too inconvenient for the world as it is. The ghost of that Roman artisan is a reminder. Sometimes the darkness that swallows an invention isn't the passage of time. It's the deliberate closing of a fist. A ghost of a different kind is on this clay disc from Crete, the Phaistos disc. It was found in a Minoan palace in 1908. A round tablet, baked clay, maybe 6 inches across, both sides covered in a spiral of stamped symbols, a man's head with a feather, a walking figure. A ship, a shield, a beehive, 45 distinct symbols in total, arranged in groups pressed into the clay with individual seals. It's a message, and no one alive can read it. The disc is a double mystery. First, the language. The script is unique. It doesn't match Linear R or Linear B, the other Minoan scripts we know. It appears nowhere else. This one artifact is its own complete universe of symbols. Linguists have tried for over a century. They've analyzed the frequency of the signs, the groupings, looking for patterns. Is it a hymn, a legal decree, a story, a king list, a board game? We have no key. The Minoan civilization flourished and then fell around 1450 BC. It took the knowledge of this script with it. The silence is total, but the second mystery is deeper, maybe the technology. Each symbol wasn't carved by hand onto this specific disc. It was stamped. Someone in a workshop on Bronze Age Crete created a set of 45 individual seals. Each seal had a raised symbol like a modern rubber stamp. Then they arranged them, pressed them one by one into the soft clay in a precise spiral order, and fired it. This is a form of movable type, a printing press in miniature, made over 3,000 years before Johannes Gutenberg. Think about that leap. It wasn't just writing, it was the mechanization of writing, the idea that you could create reusable components to produce multiple, identical texts. That's a conceptual revolution. It suggests a need or a desire for duplication. Was this disk one of many? Was there an administrative need to stamp out standard documents? Or was this a sacred object, a one-off masterpiece made with a revolutionary technique? We don't know because the technique vanished. When the Minoan palaces fell, likely to natural disaster and invasion, this fragile innovation died. It was an island technology that never spread. The seals, if they were ever made of wood or metal, have crumbled to dust. The knowledge of how to use them, the very thought process behind arranging symbols to convey meaning through stamps, evaporated. It would not re-emerge in Europe until the 15th century, so the Phaistos disc is more than an unreadable text. It's the fossil of a lost idea, a glimpse of a path not taken. It shows the concept of printing, of separating the act of composing from the act of inscribing, was intellectually possible in the Bronze Age. It was invented. And then it was forgotten for 120 generations. The disc sits in a museum in Heraklion, a quiet, circular enigma. It speaks in a language we cannot hear, using a technology whose purpose we can only guess. It's the ultimate symbol of a lost thread. Not just a lost word, but a lost way of thinking about words. Fire was a weapon of legend. The story comes from the siege of Syracuse around 212 BC. Archimedes was defending the city. The Roman fleet under Marcellus came by sea, and the story says Archimedes used a weapon of light. He had soldiers line the waterfront with polished bronze mirrors or maybe shields. They angled them to catch the sun. They focused the beams onto a single point on a wooden ship's hull. The concentrated heat made the ship smoke, and then it caught fire. A death ray from sunlight. Now did it happen? Ancient sources mention it, but the historians writing at the time of the siege don't. It's in that space between history and myth. But the question isn't just about fact, it's about possibility. Could the knowledge of the time have done it? In 2005, a team from MIT tested it. They used 127 mirrored tiles. They focused sunlight onto a replica wooden boat. They got charring and a small flame, but only under perfect, still conditions. Later, Mythbusters tried and failed, and they called it busted. But then another group from the University of Arizona tried a different setup. They produced a lot of heat, enough to ignite wood quickly. So modern science says it's physically plausible, but incredibly difficult. You'd need precise optics, a stable platform, a calm sea, and a stationary enemy. In the chaos of a real siege, the conditions were probably impossible. Yet the story persists, and it speaks to Archimedes' reputation. He built giant cranes to grab ships and great catapults. The heat ray fits the profile of his mind, so whether it was a real attempt or a later story, the concept represents a lost thread of applied optics. The knowledge needed: understanding parabolic reflectors, the focal point, aligning multiple mirrors that was within Greek geometry. Archimedes wrote on optics and math. The leap to weaponizing it was a stroke of genius, whether he did it or just thought of it, and that's why it was lost. It was a siege weapon, a specific, desperate invention for one moment. When Syracuse fell and Archimedes was killed, the context for that weapon died with him. There was no peaceful use for a device to set fleets on fire. The Roman Empire, after it took Syracuse, had no need for solar weapons. Their military relied on discipline, engineering, manpower. The knowledge, if it ever existed as a blueprint, wasn't written down. It wasn't taught. It was a tactical secret that became a campfire story, a dramatic idea that survived as legend long after any technical details were gone. The heat ray shows that not all lost inventions fade from neglect. Some are born in crisis. They serve their one terrifying purpose, and then they're abandoned by a world that's moved on. They remain as echoes of what might have been possible when a brilliant mind turned the sun into a tool of war. The heat ray was a weapon of light and fire. The next lost invention was meant for a different kind of fire, the pain inside. In Homer's Odyssey, written nearly 3,000 years ago, there's a mention. The goddess Helen offers a drink to her guests. She calls it Nepenthe, a potion that could banish grief, bring forgetfulness of all sorrow. Whoever drank it wouldn't shed a tear for an entire day. Even if their mother or father passed, even if a brother or son was lost right before their eyes, it's presented as a divine gift, a mythic comfort, but readers have wondered. Was it just a metaphor for wine, or was it a memory of something real? A specific, powerful substance from a time when medicine and ritual and magic were all the same thing. Some historians and ethnobotanists think it points to real knowledge, lost pharmacological knowledge. The ancient Mediterranean was a pharmacy of potent plants. Opium from the poppy was known, used for pain and altering mood. Other herbs like henbane or mandrake had powerful alkaloids. Could Nepenthe have been a sophisticated blend? A tincture, a wine infusion combining several ingredients to produce a profound effect, not just mild relaxation, a temporary suspension of emotional pain. A chemical respite from the weight of memory. In a world without modern psychiatry, without analgesics, such a compound would have been beyond valuable. It would have been sacred, and that's likely why it was lost. This kind of knowledge wasn't written in public manuals. It was the secret of shamans or priests or wise women. The recipe would have been an oral tradition, passed down within a closed circle. The specific proportions, the timing of harvest, the method of preparation, these details were fragile. A change in religious practice, the persecution of a pagan cult, the death of the last practitioner without an heir, and the formula evaporates. What remains is the story. The name Nepenthe, the idea that once there might have been a cup you could drink to make the world just for a day feel bearable again. Its disappearance is a profound category of loss. Not of machines or materials, but of inner technology, the ancient world's understanding of the mind through chemistry. We have their temples, we have their swords. But we've largely lost their pharmacopoeia of the spirit. Those recipes existed in a twilight zone, part healing, part ritual, part mystical experience. To lose them is to lose a piece of how people once navigated the deepest hardships. We're left with the echo in a poem, a goddess offering a drink that makes you forget. It's a ghost of a different kind, a ghost not of a tool but of a solace. Silk was never lost. The fabric kept moving along the Silk Road, but the machines, the most advanced ones, they went silent. In medieval China, under the Song Dynasty, silk making wasn't just a craft. It was an industry, and it ran on water. There are texts from the 11th century, diagrams. They describe these silk reeling machines. They weren't simple, they were complex. Wheels, belts, treadles, all driven by a water wheel. Their job was to automate the reeling. That's the step where you take the filament from the cocoon and twist it into a strong thread. The water-powered machine could handle multiple spools at once. It kept perfect tension, perfect twist. It was a leap from a workshop to something like a factory, a glimpse of an industrial revolution, centuries before the idea had a name. We have the descriptions, we have the diagrams, but the machines themselves are gone. The specific designs, the gear ratios, the little adjustments that made them work so well, that knowledge wasn't passed along. It stayed in a localized industry in China, and then that peak faded. There are reasons. The knowledge was practical. It lived in the workshops, passed from master to apprentice. And then political upheaval, the Mongol invasions, the fall of the Song Dynasty. It disrupted those production centers. The focus shifted. The most advanced models fell out of use. Simpler methods took over. Silk making continued, but the peak of its mechanization was forgotten. So when silk production reached Europe, it arrived as a manual craft. They had to start from scratch. They spent centuries trying to mechanize it. Then, in the 18th century, during the actual Industrial Revolution, inventors in Italy and England unveiled their new water-powered silk mills. They were celebrated as revolutionary, and they were, but they were also a reinvention, a rediscovery of a principle that had been perfected and then lost somewhere else long before. Those Song Dynasty machines were ghosts. Their echo wasn't heard until a similar need brought them back. It shows something, even within an unbroken tradition, a continuous practice like making silk, the most advanced technology can slip away. The foundation stays, but the highest flaws of the invention, they collapse into memory. They wait for a new generation to build them again, thinking they're the first. These were waters that could turn back time. The fountain of youth was a European obsession for centuries, a mirage on maps drawn by desperate explorers. But the legend we know is a distortion. It didn't start with a Spanish conquistador. It started with stories carried on the wind long before his ships arrived. Early European explorers reached the Caribbean and Florida. They listened to tales from the Taino and other indigenous peoples, stories about special springs or pools or rivers. Waters that could soothe aching joints, that could restore vitality, that brought healing. and the Europeans, they were conditioned by their own myths of eternal life. So these accounts could only mean one thing to them. They heard what they wanted to hear. They grafted this grand, literal fantasy onto a nuanced, practical reality. Because what the indigenous communities were describing was likely something real: natural mineral springs, thermal vents, pools rich in sulfur or minerals, known for generations to have therapeutic properties. For skin, for muscles, for recovery, this wasn't magic. It was ethnobotanical knowledge, geographical knowledge refined over millennia. It was a deep, localized understanding of the landscape as a source of medicine. The precise location of the most potent spring, the right season to visit, the rituals that accompanied its use, the knowledge of which spring was for which ailment. This was a complex, living library of wellness, written not in books but in oral tradition and practice. Then came the unthinkable tragedy, the waves of disease and conflict and displacement that followed European contact. The demographic collapse was catastrophic, and with that loss, entire libraries of knowledge held in the minds of elders and healers were silenced. The specific locations of countless sacred and medicinal sites were forgotten. The stories about the healing waters persisted, but they were severed from their roots. Stripped of their practical context, they floated free. They became the raw material for a European fairy tale. Ponce de Leon famously searched for the fountain of youth in the early 1500s. He was chasing a ghost born from a real place, a real understanding that had already been swept away by the very forces that brought him there. So when we speak of this as a lost invention, we're not talking about a plumbing marvel, not a chemical formula. We're talking about the loss of an entire system of knowledge. A way of seeing the land as a partner in health. The real tragedy isn't that the fountain was never found. It's that it existed in 100 quiet places and its meaning was stolen twice. First by historical catastrophe, and then by a legend that turned profound, practical wisdom into a shallow quest for immortality. What vanished wasn't a magical fountain. It was the map to 1,000 natural pharmacies, and the cultural compass needed to use them. The healing waters became a legend, but the truth was stripped away. There's another book from that same time. Its truth was locked away completely. It's in a library at Yale, a small, handwritten book from the 15th century. 240 pages of vellum, covered in a script no one can read. It has drawings of plants that don't exist. Women bathing in a strange green liquid. Celestial charts of constellations we don't know. This is the Voynich Manuscript. The book itself isn't lost. We can hold it. We can scan every page. But the technology of its creation, the whole system of knowledge it was meant to hold, is gone. It's a locked door, and we have no key. A complete information technology from the Renaissance. And for us, it's a silence, a beautiful and frustrating silence. Cryptographers have tried, wartime codebreakers, modern supercomputers. Linguists have analyzed the script's patterns. It has structure, repetition, word-like clusters. It behaves like a real language, but it matches no known alphabet, no cipher on Earth. The plants are fantastical composites. Roots and leaves from different species grafted together. The astronomical wheels chart cycles we don't recognize. Some think it's an elaborate hoax. A nonsense book made to deceive a wealthy patron, but the effort seems too consistent, too meticulous for just a forgery. The prevailing theory now is that it's genuine. It records something, a system of herbal knowledge, an alchemical knowledge, a mystical cosmology, a unique dialect from a lost community. But the cipher, the visual shorthand, the very grammar of its ideas died with its author. Or its last reader. This is the ultimate category of lost invention. Not a machine that broke, but a language that fell silent. Not a material whose recipe was forgotten. But a whole way of organizing thought that became untranslatable. The manuscript is a perfect symbol. It represents the fragility of understanding itself. You can preserve the physical container, the book, the scroll, the hard drive. You can preserve it with perfect fidelity. But if you lose the cultural context, the shared key of meaning, the content is just noise. The library is mute. The Voynich Manuscript is a haunting reminder. Our own civilization is producing more data than any in history. We are creating new languages of code. New symbols, new digital formats. We store everything, but the Voynich asks a quiet question, a persistent one. 500 years from now, will anyone know how to read it? Will the keys to our own knowledge survive the journey? It shows that the greatest invention isn't just the recording of information. It's the enduring ability to pass on the meaning. When that thread is cut, what remains isn't a mystery to be solved. It's a conversation once full of life that has been permanently interrupted. A single, unanswerable whisper from the past. The Voynich Manuscript stays silent. It's the last unanswered question, and going through these 15 lost inventions, you see something. It's a humbling truth. Human knowledge is a fragile flame. Time can put it out, conflict can, simple forgetfulness can. The Antikythera Mechanism, those precise gears, Greek fire, that mysterious composition. Each loss is a detour, a road not taken on the long path of progress, and you wonder, if that knowledge had flowed uninterrupted through the centuries, what then? Would our world look different? Would certain discoveries have come centuries earlier? These stories challenge something. They challenge the comfortable idea of linear advancement. Progress isn't a straight line pointing ever upward. It's a winding river, it branches. Sometimes a channel dries up completely. The water has to find a new course much later. And they show something else, the sheer ingenuity of our ancestors. Their brilliance wasn't lesser. It was just expressed with the tools and materials they had. They observed the world with the same curiosity we have. They solved problems with a creativity that still astonishes us. The self-healing concrete, the nanotechnology in a Roman cup, the mechanical universe in a bronze box. These aren't primitive steps, they're peaks that were later shrouded in fog. So this exploration, it should be more than a catalogue of marvels. It should inspire a different way of seeing, to value the knowledge of today, to actively preserve it, not just the big, flashy breakthroughs, the quiet, practical wisdom too. The oral histories, the artisanal skills, the digital formats we assume will last forever. Our own era is creating its own vulnerable threads. What modern invention might be forgotten 1,000 years from now? Maybe a piece of software, a social media platform, a specific alloy, a cultural practice. What fragile flame are we holding without even realizing how easily the wind could snuff it out?